Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We're looking forward to talking about siblings today. On behalf of the Pediatric Palliative Care Coalition in Pennsylvania, the Coalition for Compassionate Care of California, the Greater Illinois Pediatric Palliative Care Coalition, I'd like to welcome you today. My name is Betsy Hawley. I'm the Executive Director of the Pediatric Palliative Care Coalition. And again, this webinar series is a collaboration between several pediatric palliative care coalitions across the country. Did also want to highlight today, since we are talking about siblings, Camp Kangaroo, which is sponsored by Seasons Hospice. It's a bereavement camp for children who have suffered the death of a loved one. Please click on the link here. The camp is available and offered in quite a few places across the country. The link will give you more information about the camp and how to enroll a child in that camp. Also did want to highlight our Creative Therapies Toolkit on the Pediatric Palliative Care Coalition website. You can download fun activities to do at home with a child, whether you're a parent or a professional caregiver in the home with the child. There are activities that were put together by music therapists, play therapists, and art therapists. Obviously, it's not doing therapy in the home, but there are great ideas that can help to spark interest and provide some fun times for kids in the home. So please take a look at that on the Pediatric Palliative Care Coalition website. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. We're so pleased to have Elena Zedelovsky and Dana Richmond with us. Elena is the Vice President of Patient Experience at Seasons Hospice and Palliative Care. She has over 15 years of bedside experience working with patients and families at end of life. In addition to hospice and palliative care, Elena is licensed as a mental health practitioner, board certified as a child life specialist, and holds an advanced designation as a hospice and palliative care music therapist. And we're delighted to have Dana Richmond, an occupational therapist and founding member of the L Foundation. Dana is currently working in the inpatient rehab at Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation in West Orange, New Jersey. The mission of the L Foundation is to create memories of joy for children battling a reoccurrence of cancer. As a sibling of a child who has passed away from cancer, Dana is looking forward to sharing her personal experience to raise awareness and give siblings a voice. So Dana and Elena, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Welcome everybody to Don't You Forget About Me, Caring for Siblings. A great big welcome to our clinicians, our parents, our peers, and obviously the siblings who have joined us on this call today. So I want to encourage us to really consider the following questions. These are our objectives for today, is really focusing in on increasing our understanding of the experiences and the perspectives of siblings, identifying elements and supporting siblings in the population, and also inspiring us as clinicians and parents to move from an intent, which is always very positive, to really intentional interactions with siblings. So while we're going through our slides today and having this discussion, I want you to consider the following questions, especially if you are a clinician on this call. When we're in a pediatric patient's home, who do I or we as a team care for? Who are we responsible for caring for? And also, what percentage of time when we are in the home are we spending with those siblings, and why? What's our own barriers, or what are the barriers that we're facing? We're going to tackle a lot of that today on our call. So because we really want to put siblings right front and center, I want to start with this really beautiful quote. From a parent's perspective, it's a mother's perspective around the experience of her son whose brother was dying of a cancer of some form. At 3 years of age, my younger son would wake up every morning and ask, "Who's coming for me today?" Having a brother with medical complexity means many, many people visit your home at all hours for the purpose of supporting your brother. If you are lucky, someone will stop and connect with you for a few moments, maybe even play with you. Through a community-based palliative program, we were able to have a volunteer come once a week for the sole purpose of playing with my younger son. These visits were golden to him. They boosted his self-esteem and gave him a place of value in the sea of visitors. So I want to take this opportunity to really introduce and welcome Dana Richmond, who is our sibling and will share with you her story with her sister, Lauren.
As Yelena said, my name is Dana Richmond, and the next couple of slides will go give you a little bit of a backstory of who I am and who my sister is and was, and our journey together, and how we traveled through the journey as a family for many years, and kind of give some insight onto how that kind of shaped who the person I am today and the relationship that I still have with my parents and the rest of my family. The slides here you see is myself and my sister. I'm older by 3 years. Lauren is on the left in the first picture that you have, and I'm on the right. That's my sweet 16. Lauren, my sister, was diagnosed at age 10. She was diagnosed with a chordoma tumor that was on her brainstem. She fought for 5 years and passed away December 2008. During that time, I was 13 when she was first diagnosed, and I was a freshman in college when she passed away. So majority of my adolescent, young adult life was spent, with my sister while she was battling cancer and undergoing her treatments. As I said, these pictures here, as you kind of go through the next couple of slides, will just give you a little bit of our journey and kind of what we went through as a family and how my sister fought, and kind of the purpose of this chat today is to talk about kind of my perspective and things that were going really well for me, and things that we kind of from a child life perspective and from a therapy perspective now want to make sure that we are focusing on the siblings and kind of the role that they play while their sibling is undergoing treatment. During this time, my sister was treated in New York City, where she was first diagnosed. And I remember the day she was diagnosed. We were all sitting. I was at school. I was in school, and my aunt came to pick me up and brought me into the city. And I was sitting there with my parents, my sister, my aunt, and my uncle. And the doctor comes out and says, your sister has a brain tumor. And it still, even looking back, feels very much like an out-of-body experience, which anybody on the call who's currently going through this might feel something similar. It's kind of like, how is this happening to us? And as a 13-year-old, I'm worried about boys and school, and all of a sudden your world is changing, and what that means and how you're going to have to support your family, and at the same time, you're thinking, oh, it's all going to be okay. It has to be okay. You put your faith in doctors and surgeries and chemotherapy, and you say, it's all going to be okay. After my sister had her surgeries in New York City, my sister was treated up in Boston for her proton radiation. So the bottom right is a picture of us up in Boston, and she spent a lot of time there. And that's kind of where I turned from a 13-year-old young adult to an adult. I had to grow up very fast. I was still in school. I was trying to get into college. I was in dance and Girl Scouts and all of these crazy activities, trying to get into a good school and trying to figure out, who I am as a person and what I want the rest of my life to look like. And my family lived in Boston, and I was bounced around, so to speak, from family to family. I could take care of myself, but it was really at that point the driving, who was going to drive me to all of these crazy activities that I needed to go to. And it was during that time that, I just remember feeling like, when is it going to be a normal day? When can I have a normal weekend with my family? Or when can I have a normal time hanging out with my friends? But my days were very much occupied with planning how I was going to get to school, how I was going to get to dance, who was going to drive me, how was I going to get to Boston on the weekends to see my family. And so I remember just thinking to myself, like, how long is this going to go on for? Like, how long can we sustain this? I remember my mom calling, during the week, just checking in. And, my mom, I think also, and we've kind of talked about this later in life, is how it was a little bit of a struggle, making sure that my mom felt like she was pulled kind of in two directions. She had to be with my sister, but also, making sure that she was, checking in with me and, seeing how I was doing. Unfortunately, she had to miss some very big life events. There was 8th grade graduation and my high school graduation. And, I remember that taking a large toll on her. And looking back now, as an adult, it's, at the time, you kind of just put your head down through it and say, oh, I'm okay, I can take care of myself. I don't need this family support. I can do it. You worry about Lauren and you worry about treatment. But, looking back and as you get older and as you meet new people who don't know my sister and don't know my family, and, it does play a little bit more of a role than I think anyone really realized as it was all happening. And now, it's we don't really talk about that. Mom wasn't at high school graduation, or, I got into college by myself, and those major life moments. And people have different experiences, based on the age of the sibling or age of the child undergoing treatment. But, for me, it was definitely a little bit of a struggle of not wanting to take the time away from my parents, but I think, still feeling like I needed that time. So, my sister was brilliant. She wanted to be the first woman president. She was awesome in school. She was this force to be reckoned with, and she was also wise and older than her years. Like I said, she fought from 10 age 10 to age 15 when she passed away. She actually passed away the week of Christmas. We mentioned the L Foundation, and my sister, along with my family, are the founding members of the L Foundation. My sister was technically deemed in remission at some point during her battle with cancer, and through her amazing, team of social workers and child life specialists, she was able to have wishes granted. She went to Disney World on Make-A-Wish, and when she was first diagnosed, and then as she got older, her wishes kind of changed. And as I said, she was brilliant. So she actually wrote a book, and she wrote a book of poems, and the Marnie Lyons Foundation was very instrumental in helping her publish her book. And this slide that you see here with my sister and the trach on the left side was at one of their many fundraising events, and Marty and Lauren were the dynamic duo. They would sell her book and raise money for the Marnie Lyons Foundation. And at that time, Marty's mission was really to focus on those children who had a wish before and was undergoing treatment and had come out of remission, and what their life looks like now. And his role was really to help those kids who, like my sister, were older and didn't want to go to Disney World anymore. They wanted to now leave a legacy as they were starting to look at their end of life, really. And Lauren really helped him with all of that. When the recession hit in about 2007, Marty had went to Lauren as kind of like Lauren was an adult, and she said, we can't do this anymore. We don't have the funds to help children who are battling cancer a second time. And my sister looked at him and said, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. This second time around, kids are, they need that support even more than the first time around. She goes, my options are more limited. She goes, even as far as treatment and support and all of these things. And she said, this is important, and I'm going to do it. So my sister actually joined our foundation and talked a little bit about our mission. And so we really are, to our knowledge, the only foundation that will grant these second wishes for children who are, undergoing a recurrence of cancer. And, we want to raise awareness for that because we want to be a resource for children and their families to know that we're out there to help them through this. And, we are a family who can relate on many levels and to help be a support for these families. We got to do some pretty cool things. As you see some pictures of the White House there. And, like I said, growing up very quickly, and even from, founding the L Foundation, when I'm in high school and all of these things, it was definitely a journey. But we're feel very blessed to have this legacy of Lauren's and to continue this foundation in her memory and to help other children. Just us being goofy, I guess. But, this picture really does remind me a lot of my childhood and growing up and, looking back and some of the things, and I don't love the word regret, but, a lot of it, like I was saying, you're a teenager, and anyone who remembers their teenage years, you're old enough to be alone and be by yourself. So a lot of the conversations, when I would get to the hospital, it was more just like visiting with your sister and, spending as much time with her as you could. But as I look back, and as, after my sister passed away, there is a lot of information that was said about her treatment and her plan and, these conversations that I missed that I do wish that I was a part of. I had mentioned that I had really unrealistic expectations, and my mom and I didn't see eye to eye on that a lot. And, and there were times for me to be with my sister. There were times for me to be with my friends. I was young, and I said, I want to be 13. I want to be 14. I want to go to the movies with my friends. And, my sister's always going to be there, and it's going to work out okay. And, I think my mom struggled a lot with how much do you tell Dana, how much do we tell her how serious this is? And, we got into a lot of arguments with that because it was very much my mom trying to help me realize that, this is probably not going to be okay without just kind of saying it. And it is a very fine line. And I think through this presentation, we are trying to help kind of open up lines of communication and say, siblings want to be involved. I wanted to be involved in those conversations, and I think it would have helped me, even now later in life, cope and see, as this journey was going on, be a little bit more a part of that.
I think, Dana, to your point, it's about opening those lines of communication. It's also about finding that meaning for somebody like you who may have not been able to participate in that. So there's probably some bereavement counselors on this call or individuals who are clinicians who are working with the bereaved siblings as well, and possibly even parents that may have those feelings that you're talking about, maybe not using the term regret, but that idea of if they have lost a child, that perhaps they want to now circle back with those siblings and help them find meaning. I don't know if you've ever looked really closely at this image, but for all of you watching today, on the bottom right corner, it says my first Christmas. I think that's a pillow, right, Dana?
Yeah.
and I believe this is the second to last. This is the last full Christmas where Lauren was participating, the second to last Christmas of her life, right? Where she was still engaged.
Yes, yeah, this is it, and the alarms are going off, and sometimes you just want peace and quiet. So I was like, well, forget this. I'll just take your pull socks, and I'll just make everything look perfect. But yeah, this was the second to last. Like I said, she passed away December 20th, so she was home on hospice care at that point. So the last Christmas she was home decorating our Christmas tree a few days before, and then passed away December 20th, and we buried her Christmas Eve. So yeah, but that was her pillow and her rattle dolly there that she was inseparable with. And this is just the last picture of us. So, every child, when they're, going through 10 years old and diagnosed with cancer, the first question your parents are going to ask you is, what do you want? And Lauren wanted a dog. So there you go. That's about there. And I'm in one of the events with the Marty Lyons Foundation and Lauren's book that she wrote on the right. She, like I said, was definitely a force to be reckoned with, and she was a presence, and never even really saw herself as this child undergoing treatment. She would be in these oncology units, and she would want to take care of all the other sick kids, and she would get all these presents, and she would give them out to everybody, and always just wanted to care for others. She's a big reason why I'm an occupational therapist today. We talk a lot about this in college, and what brings you into this calling of wanting to work in a hospital and be in a hospital, and how are you comfortable with that? And you'll meet really two types of people in this world: people who can be in hospitals and it doesn't faze them, and other people who are like, that is definitely not for me, and I will never set foot in a hospital. And I do think we talk a lot about these were very influential years, and I was very much used to going to school, going to the hospital, going back to school, traveling to go to different hospitals, and in that sense I'm very grateful, because I'm very passionate about what I do. I don't personally work with pediatrics, but I am very much in a hospital setting, and we do have cancer programs where I work on. It definitely has shaped the person that I am, and seeing her go through therapy for many years. So like I said, she passed away. She was 15, and we worked together as a family to just keep her memory alive, and to help other people in need, and through our story, help open lines of communication to family inclusiveness, and having the siblings have a voice. And even in the L Foundation now, my role very much, well, do they have a brother? Does this child have a sister? What are they doing on this trip that they're going on that's meaningful for them? And remembering that, because they are very much part of this conversation, as they should be. And it's obviously case by case basis. There'll probably be people who don't want to be as involved, but it does definitely play a very big role in the family dynamic. It still plays a very big role in my family dynamic, and how my mother and I have a relationship with each other, and how my father and I have a relationship with each other, and how those relationships differ. And so, that's kind of our hope through all of this, is to share my story, and, just help, raise awareness to this topic. So, Yelena, I will give it back to you.
Thank you. I had the great privilege of meeting Dana on her journey, and not as much as I wished for during Lauren's journey, which I took part in as a clinician on her team. But I will say, Dana, you are a tour de force. You're a force to be reckoned with, and I am very grateful to you, and very privileged and honored to help propel forward the idea of siblings with you. So I think one of the big things is, as much as we want to protect children, period, our children who are sick, our children whose brothers and sisters are sick, so on and so forth, Dr. Kaur really identifies this well. Being young is no infallible shield protecting children from all the harsh realities of life. And so I think one of the things is why we're bringing this forward is what Dana's really talked about a lot here, which is there was a lot of omission and absence in her experience. And consider her age, she was a teenager at the time that Lauren was diagnosed, and she was almost an adult, and practically a young adult at the time that Lauren had died. And yet she was, we were really trying to protect her, or both her parents and her team was trying to find a way to protect her. And in that absence or omission of information, now she is working through that process on the back end, when she could have been a part of that process to begin with. And so historically speaking, there was once upon a time, so to speak, that our literature really provided safer ways to address death. The original fairy tales, the Grimm's brothers, Aesop's fables, and the more we've stepped away from that, the more we are creating these scenarios where individuals are working through their experiences long after the fact instead of feeling a sense of control or a sense of connection to the experience at hand. So I want to look at the variables that really do impact the sibling's response to death of a brother or sister. This is not something that occurs in isolation in any way, shape, or form. And realistically speaking, this is actually these are variables that actually impact adults. They impact the pediatric patients. They impact everybody. But they're particularly impactful in terms of the sibling reality, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so situational variables really relate to the circumstances of the death. What are the circumstances of the illness? How did the child die? So in Dana and Lauren's case, we're talking about a brain tumor and an extended illness over a period of many years. Individual variables are really the characteristics or the personality of the child. And as we all know, there's an innate, sort of a nature-nurture discussion here, right? There's an innate personality in a child. And then there's the characteristics and personalities that develop over the course of their lives. And I think the reason that siblings are so impacted beyond the fact that that relationship is different than any other relationship in life, but the reason that siblings are very much impacted is the fact that their development changes, and at every phase of their lives, they're going to have a very different response to those individual variables. And so their ebbs and flows in terms of their grief journey is going to be very different than the rest of us. And then the environmental variables are really those that contribute to the social atmosphere of the child's environment. That could be the school, that could be their peer group, that could be any sorts of extracurricular activities. It could also be socioeconomic factors, or where they live, or their communities at hand, their connection to faith and religion, so on and so forth. And the most significant factor that impacts a sibling's response to a death is actually the family. It's the family reactions. It's the family's integration of that sibling into a care plan. If, for example, we're talking about a chronic illness, it's the family's impact or discussions around and inclusion of that sibling in terms of the death itself and what happens following the death. So loss in and of itself I want to talk about as a definition, because I think sometimes we miss something. It seems a little bit simple or simplified to think about what the definition of loss is, but there's an important piece to it. So obviously we all know that loss is an absence of something or someone, but there's a bigger part to what makes loss loss. And that is that there has to be a value or meaning associated with that something or someone for somebody to actually grieve it. And so that's why we're talking so much about meaning and impact and the ability to help our siblings participate in care before and participate at the death and participate following and be a part of that bereavement journey. And in terms of parents and guardians and clinicians, oftentimes we're not including them because really we have a few thoughts, right? We fear that that they don't process or understand things, and that may be true at certain developmental stages. But really that fear comes from a bigger piece, which is I don't have the language to support them as I open up a wound that I am also experiencing myself, and I don't know how to deal with it. And so I think that's why we frequently overlook the siblings or other children in that scenario. So the sibling bond is really important to think about as well, because the sibling bond begins at the time of conception, or at the time that one sibling really becomes aware of the other's existence. So in Lauren and Dana's case, it would have been when Dana becomes aware that Lauren is somewhere in mom's belly, or whatever it was that you were identified, hopefully a little bit more developmentally appropriate than that, but it's at the point at which Dana now knows that Lauren is going to exist in their lives. And so that's when the sibling bond forms. And it may form in a very positive, strong connection right away. You know, some of us are very excited when our siblings are coming and we're about to have a little baby brother or baby sister. Others not so excited about that experience. But that experience in and of itself is the fact that there's an existence of another human being that's about to invade my life and participate in my life is when that bond begins. And so that's very unique and different to any other experience that we have or any other relationship. And for siblings, there's a lot of this trust and interdependence. So in a normal, and I hate that term, but in a normal environment, siblings spend close to 80 to 100% of their lifespans together or with one another. And that's compared to about 40 to 60% with their parents. So you can see that we have a lot more time to form that bond, a closer alliance with our siblings. And the relationship is really sort of an ascribed relationship, right? It's assigned. We know we don't get to choose, our parents choose or our guardians choose for us. One of the things I think we all noticed, and I want to make us cognizant and aware of it, is when Dana speaks of Lauren, she still says my sister, my sibling. This is a slightly unique use of language, which is different from other relationships that exist, because that relationship never separates apart. I've heard, in working with children at the end of life and their families, I sometimes hear parents ask questions about their own identity. Am I still a mother if my child is no longer here and present and has died? That doesn't happen with siblings. They are always connected. They're always interconnected. And so I think these are really important key pieces to why that relationship and that bond and why it is our impetus and our responsibility to support the siblings. So for those of you who are clinicians, I want to talk a little bit about what demoralization syndrome is. It's been proposed multiple times to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's in a section around complicated grief and bereavement. And so it's really an idea about maintaining hope. And the reason I'm bringing this forward is the idea of the loss of meaning or purpose. And when we exclude siblings from these conversations, or when we omit them, or when there's an absence and they feel that absence, there's no question Dana felt that absence, all siblings feel that absence. When that absence is there, their search for meaning continues in a very different way. At various developmental stages, it's going to be very different. And for younger siblings, they're going to fill in the gaps of what we haven't shared with them. For older siblings, they're going to start questioning their own identity, their own relationship. And so the proposed criteria around this demoralization syndrome is symptoms of existential distress, so meaning making or meaning loss, helplessness, something that siblings feel a great deal of, is feeling that sense of helplessness, not being able to save their loved one, save their sibling, not being able to participate in care and help them in one way, shape, or form. Hopelessness, sometimes the belief that, there's an absence in my parents, is that going to go on and on? Obviously, the isolation, that's an obvious one because siblings often are isolated, especially at younger ages. There's an absence sometimes of drive or an exhaustion. So Dana talked a little bit about everything that I had to do had to work around my own schedule, getting myself to school, getting myself to Boston, getting myself to the hospital. That when a sibling is picking that up, there's that sort of absence of drive with the other things. It's not uncommon for us to be approached from school psychologists or school counselors, and they say that your child is really struggling at school right now. Well, why? Because they're exhausted with everything else that's going on, and they sometimes don't have the language to express that to all of us. And so it's important for us to be able to seek that out of them. And then the lack of support, which when we have an absence of parent or guardian, and that's been our routine all these years, then that can often feel that way. And so I just want to throw this out as something to consider when you're working with the siblings in these families. So there are some historical impacts on sibling bereavement that have been beautifully written about and beautifully expressed. And so I want to sort of take us through. So in the top left, what you see is the screen. Many of you are probably familiar with this image. It's Edvard Munch from Norway, and there was a central theme in a series of his paintings that actually derived from the death of his sister Sophie, and he felt most attached to her. She died at the age of 15. He was 1 year younger at the time. He was 14. And the impact of her death actually became a focus of the most significant aspects of his art, so that series, which is as well known as Scream, if not better known. To the right of Edvard Munch's piece is Pablo Picasso's piece called The Tragedy. And this is specifically related to the death of his sister, which also actually, when he writes about, or when you look at some of the biographies about him, emphasized his tendency to withdraw more from the world. And so he really expresses that the impact of her death on his parents emphasized how critical a variable it was on his own bereavement and his own grief experience. And in some places we'll see that it talks about them never recovering from the tragedy. In fact, when you look at this image, you see that both of the parents or adults in this image are standing very internally inward, protected, whereas there's the young boy reaching out, either reaching out to help support or reaching out for help himself. And so she died when he was 14. She died of diphtheria at the age of 8. The next image on the top to the right of Picasso is an image by Salvador Dali, where in this case it's more of the variable of the impact on a sibling that a sibling's death can have on children who are actually born after. And he actually describes the role that his brother's death played in his early development in one of his papers. And he writes the following: "At the age of 7, my brother died of meningitis 3 years before I was born. This shook my mother to the very depths of her being. She was never to get over it. My parents' despair was assuaged only by my own birth, but their misfortune still penetrated every cell of their bodies. I deeply experienced the persistence of his presence as both a trauma, a kind of alienation of affection, and a sense of being outdone. All my efforts thereafter were strained towards winning back my rights to life, first and foremost by attracting the constant attention and interest of those close to me." Really, that impact can carry on and carry forward, and it's important for us to be aware and mindful of that. To the right of that is a poem by Oscar Wilde, where he was a teenager when his sister, who was 9 at the time, also died from meningitis. And in his youth and throughout his life, he paid these regular visits to her grave. And in the poem Requiescat, he writes, "Tread lightly, she is near, under the snow. Speak gently, she can hear the lilies grow. All her bright golden hair tarnished with rust, she that was young and fair, fallen to dust." And so that impact and the impact of his words and the impact of his writing throughout his life really was in relationship to this experience that he had with his sister. Many of you are familiar with Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte. When she was 5, her mother died, and when she was 9, both of her older sisters died. And in a lot of biographies about her, it talks of how she spoke obsessively about her sisters in her adolescence. And actually, a part of Jane Eyre structured around Maria's character and subsequent death is an homage in many ways to both her older sisters. And then I wanted to bring something in that's a little bit closer to our current scenario, and that's Elvis Presley. He actually had an experience of guilt in continuing to live. His twin brother died in childbirth. He was stillborn, and he blamed himself in reaction to his mother's overwhelming grief throughout his life. So much so that there was an unmarked grave for Jesse, who the family named, and he often would go there and speak to him. And later on his Graceland property, he actually created and built a cemetery that was for his brother and his mother itself. And so I just bring these in to put forward the impact that a sibling's grief can have over the many, 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 many years. And in many of these circumstances and experiences, they probably were not participating in the care or the experiences, and several of them, of course, occurred before they were born themselves. So one of the big things that I'd like to sort of toss back to Dana, because she alluded to this a little bit today, is that loss of the parent's attention, and sometimes the resentment that can occur. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Dana experienced the resentment, but it's not uncommon for our sibling for our siblings to feel that sense of resentment and loneliness, because what they were once used to in terms of their parents' attention, the attention of others around them, has really sort of separated and become distant. And the longer that happens, the harder it becomes. And then there's also that setting of what we consider a parentified child, which we sometimes see, which is a child who has these unreasonable or not age-appropriate expectations set before them. Dana, I don't know if there's something that you wanted to add into that idea of being alone in this process and feeling alone.
I always used to say when I was going through college, and I used to say, people used to ask me that question, well, how is your relationship? Do you resent your parents for them not taking care of you? And my answer was always no. I never felt like I was somebody who was mad at them or someone who felt left out. I always felt, I did what I needed to do to help my family. They did what they needed to do to help my sister. I never really related to that. It's actually funny, though, not funny, but, as I get older and I'm dating and you're doing all of these things and I'm in a profession where I take care of other people, I've been asked questions like, well, what do you want? Or what do you need to take care of yourself, because you're taking care of other people all day? And I'm not used to asking myself those questions. And so as it's been more of a conversation recently that, a lot of that may stem from the fact that, I never asked myself, like, what do I need to take care of myself, or what makes me happy, or what do I want, and how can I be a little selfish now later in life, and, what do I want from my parents, what do I need from my relationship with my parents now or the rest of my family? And it's definitely still very much a work in progress, but it is still a work in progress, even as I'm older and our relationship is changing, as we're getting older, as my parents are getting older. But yeah, no, I definitely can relate to that a little bit. I always used to say, no, I'm good, it's all good. And now, as you kind of figure out what I want for the rest of my life and how Yelena talked a lot about how, like, she's still my sister, and people ask me, do you have any siblings? And yes, I have a younger sister, and what that looks like for conversations and when you meet new people, it definitely does very much play a role in future relationship building and, my relationship even with myself for that matter. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dana. And actually, we'll just keep moving forward, but this lifespan slide, next slide, please, is really about how we impact at the beginning of our lives we react very similarly later on. So I want to talk a little bit about locus of control, because I think that's a really important piece for the clinicians and parents here that are working with the siblings in the family unit. The locus of control is the child's belief that he or she has the ability to master their environment. And so for some younger siblings and children, they may show some fears in coming towards their sibling. It may be because they feel this internal locus of control where maybe they would hurt or bring them more pain. In others, it may be an external belief that's usually where you see a little bit more of that resentment happening or that loneliness happening, because what's happening in their lives is sort of out of their hands, but it's almost like it's forced upon them, or somebody is punishing them for something that happened. And so when we're thinking about or working with these siblings, it's really important, especially the younger ones, for us to identify whether this child is focused in on the internal or the external, because that can give us a lot of openings and opportunities for what we do next. So this is really about thought to action. We talked a little bit about the fear that we don't know how to have these conversations, how to present this, how to really lead and guide with a sense of confidence. And so I love this quote, because it's really about moving from intent to intentional is really about having courage. It's courage to take what we know in our hearts and put that into action, and get over sort of that thinking and just put it out there. It's the courage to take that action despite our fear, and because of our fear, not just sort of stop ourselves. And so the idea of having this intent to intentional is we all intend to do the right thing. We all intend to help these children, these siblings, these families. But it's one thing to intend to do it. What's intentional about it is how do we do it, right? That's the how that we're getting to. So how do we get the permission to talk to the siblings? How do we even talk to them in the first point? So simplification, this is the key here. We want to focus in, especially the younger the sibling is, we want to focus in on who, what, where, when, why, and how. Really, really simplified. In smaller pieces, the younger the child is, or the earlier they are in their developmental stages, and much more the older the child is, maybe a tween or a teen that we're talking to. But the other thing is, every child, almost at any level of that spectrum, so even young children, school-aged children, tweens, and teenagers, and even sometimes young adolescents, we are mostly nonverbal at that age. Yes, we have language, but we don't have the language necessarily to express ourselves. What we do have is play, the younger we are, right? That's how we navigate our world. And the older we are, possibly some creative arts, so journaling, music, art. Music is a really big one. I'm a music therapist by training, and it's what I've done the majority of my nearly 20-year career now. And so when I'm going to talk to siblings who are teenagers or young adults, I often don't lead with, tell me a little bit about your sibling or your sister or your brother. I often lead with, what are you listening to right now? Because oftentimes that's on a cycle. Many of us have that, right? We get connected to something, it emotionally ties into us, and then we listen to it over and over again. Same is true for a lot of teenagers and young adults in that age. And so we can really get to the root of what's happening for them then. A big piece that we need to think about in order to go from intent to intentional is barriers that we may have in gaining access to how we have conversations with the parents and the guardians for these siblings. And a big part of that is overcoming the fact that they have this fear and navigating a way to open up. So one of the biggest things I often say is, I'm not going to necessarily, I work in hospice, so I'm not going to necessarily use the term hospice, but I also won't lie to your child if they ask me a question directly. And so then I want to talk through, what does that look like? And oftentimes I'll bring back, again, because children, tweens, and teens operate in the nonverbal, the play, the creative arts world, I'll bring forward things of that nature. So let's say a teenager will tell me that the piece of music they're using is the song called Hold My Hand, which was a very popular piece quite a few years ago, so I'm probably giving my age away a little bit. But and the song was posthumously released after Michael Jackson's death, and really it's around, what do I need in this moment in time? And it was a teenager with a sibling who wasn't able to share what they needed at that moment in time. But the lyrics talked about how things were getting dark, how they were fearful, how they really just wanted somebody to sit there and tell them it was going to be okay and be present with them and not exclude them. And so I often bring that as a bridge to the parents to share that, to sort of overcome those hurdles and those barriers that they may be creating. And a lot of that creation is their own fear of having to continue those conversations. I know we're running short, so I want you to think about, in a couple of moments, we're going to open this up and really give you an opportunity to ask questions of Dana on what are some of the things that we need to know to support the needs of sisters and brothers. But we want to leave you with some really tangible, simple things to do. And so we want to leave you with this acronym. It's a mnemonic around the term child, because we think that it's simple. And so these are the terms: consider, honesty, involve, listen, do it over and over again, that are around, how do I start having this conversation? Parents especially, how do I start having this conversation with either my child who may be ill or my child who is watching their brother or sister go through this treatment or go through this illness, or potentially is looking towards a life without having their brother or sister physically present next to them. And so I want to go through what each of those is. And so consider the child's age, the developmental level, and the capacity to understand both the concept of death along with the thoughts and the feelings. So how we approach a child, how we communicate with them should involve that sort of consideration. Honesty and talking about the death, and this is a big one for us. No euphemisms. Use the D word, death, dead, dying. Why? Because every other word that we often use, that euphemism has another meaning to it, another impact to it. For young children, that can be very confusing. So if we're using the term pass away, pass is passing through something. Pass could be passing gas for the younger ones who want to chuckle a little bit, right? Expire, when we use expire, which we use a lot in healthcare, we don't expire like milk. And so there's a lot of confusion around that. A couple of years ago, I was leading a Camp Kangaroo, and we had these group of boys, and sadly they had a subsequent death in their family during the weekend that they were with us at camp. And so their aunt and grandmother came to have to deliver this. And as they were delivering this news about their uncle's death, they had said all of these other terms because they were fearful. They didn't know how quite to approach it, and they asked us to help them. And so we're watching these young boys. One of them was about 5 at the time, one of them was about 8 or 9 at the time, one of them was about 11 at the time, sort of cock their heads to one side, really not understanding if they were saying, well, we lost your uncle the other day, or, you know, your uncle passed the other day. And so we had this moment and we realized it wasn't that they were in shock, it was that they really didn't understand what was being said. And since they had spent the weekend with us learning this language, they said, your uncle was hit by a car yesterday and he died. And in that moment, there was this great clarity for them and a relief for their grandmother and their aunt, and they ran off, and the 5-year-old ran off to play, which is normal for his development, and eventually came back and asked a little bit more about his uncle. The 8-9-year-old, he went off and needed to sit by himself for a moment, and the 11-year-old became parentified immediately and started trying to help the aunt and the grandmother in coping with their own loss. And so, and then we watched them come back as they were able and ready and willing to have this conversation and ask more questions. And so just something to be cognizant of. We need to have some level of ability as clinicians to accept what is happening. The involving piece, the encouraging the child's participation in family discussions and letting the child choose the level of involvement is a really easy way to navigate where they're at, what they understand, and what's happening. So it's an easy way to navigate the first one, which is around the consideration. And then listening. Let the child share what they do and do not understand about the death, and let them talk through what they are thinking about. That gives you a lot of insight into sort of where they are and what they need from you. And so instead of us being fearful of being able to find that language, let's let that sibling drive that conversation for us to know exactly what they're needing and worried about and what they're fearful of and hopeful for. And then the very last is the doing it over and over again. We started here, but at every developmental stage, at various points throughout a child's life, they're going to need to ask about the circumstances of the death or the memories that are fading about their sibling repeatedly. And so we need to be prepared for that because they can only take in so much information at a time. And at each stage, they're going to have these new perspectives. And I think that's the hardest part that we have in helping our siblings and as parents helping your children is that we re-grieve or we bring up those wounds over and over again in new ways through the eyes of the children and the siblings that we are serving. So with that, I want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions.
So please, there is still a few minutes of time to put your questions in, again, on the right-hand side of your screen in the question box there. You can put some questions in. In the meantime, we do have a few questions that have already come in, and they're directed mostly to you, Dana. So I hope that that works for you.
Yep.
Somebody asked us, what was the most memorable thing that occurred while your sister was sick? You shared a lot of memorable things, but is there anything that sticks out for you?
Memorable, I think of, my first thought is, what was like one of the best things. I do remember, being a part of her oncology where she was getting her chemotherapy treatment, and I do remember just the staff trying to, really trying to, I wasn't there all that often, but when I was there, trying to talk with me and trying to include me in the process and really make my sister and I feel special, and our bond of, Dana coming to visit today and, what that meant and how that was, something that didn't happen very often. So that was one of the good memories that I remember. I also remember
so really the clinician taking the time to pull you out.
Yes.
Is there anything that you think that that Lauren was able to share with you that she couldn't share with anybody else? Was there, what do you think that you brought to Lauren's experience?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that we did have, a very good sibling bond. I do think that we were very close, and we did want to spend a lot of time together. And I remember Lauren, always asking, if she could come with me when I would go out. And, my family did a really good job of making sure that, we did spend some quality time together. My sister was a writer, so she did write me a note before I went off to college, just, explaining how much she loved me and how much she meant to me, and I cherish that a lot. And the bond that we did have. There's a moment where I was a lifeguard and it was raining and the pool was empty, and I had called home and I said, hey Lauren, what are you doing? Come up and hang out with me, keep me company. And it was just the two of us, and that was a moment that we looked back on for quite some time, that it was just a moment of the two of us, or we could just kind of be kids. I think my sister looked to me to just be a kid with and escape from treatment. And I think that was something that I could provide to her, was, just a little bit of freedom and just to be a little bit normal when there were times where it was just the two of us. I think she looked for that a lot.
Great, thank you. And I think we can end with this question. If there was one thing that a healthcare provider should know when approaching the siblings of pediatric patients, what would be that one pearl of wisdom that you would send people off with?
I think, my thought would be, everybody is different and every situation is different and every sibling is different. But, as Elena was also saying, give it a shot, talk to the sibling, see if they're willing to have a conversation with you about, their feelings and what's going on and what they need, whether it's asking them what they're listening to or asking them, what they think about the situation, and kind of just trying to get a read for them. And just letting them know that, there is support out there. I think that was something that I really didn't realize or, capitalize on until it was maybe a little too late. Lauren was kind of out of treatment and more towards the hospice side of things, that there are resources for siblings, and that, that as much as, you all as clinicians are there for the family and the patient, but also for the sibling, I think that it's important, and I don't think that it's something that the sibling really realizes, and, whether they're younger, in that quote that we had, who's coming to play with me today versus me being older and, me wanting to just know what's going on, throughout the lifespan, there is still this, where do I fit in? And, sometimes it's a little unclear. And so just, asking everybody to kind of just engage, if the sibling is willing and what they need to help kind of support themselves and take care of the sibling themselves.
Great, thank you so much. We did have one additional question I just want to make a comment on. There's a grandmother who's been on the webinar, and I think they're particularly poignant issues for grandparents who are watching both their sick siblings and their sick grandchildren and their well grandchildren. So for that grandmother who asked a question, we'll be commenting on an email back to you. So we will get something back to you on that. I just want to say, Elena and Dana, thank you so much for spending the time with us this afternoon. What a wealth of information. Elena, your clinical information was phenomenal. Dana, I don't think that any of us are soon to forget the personal story that you shared with us and the importance of connecting with siblings. So thank you both very, very much. Thank all of you for tuning in to the webinar today. So again, thank you very much, and we'll see you in March.